to help move it ahead. So this is a picture that was put out by the OAPC, and it just kind of shows the current state now, where if a patient calls 911 and they ask for an ambulance, really there's no choice but to send a paramedic and then transport to the hospital. And then, you know, what happens is the hospital becomes backed up. What the vision is the patient, you know, still call 911, but this dispatch almost becomes like the hub or the navigator, and they can send them to different areas. And it also shows paramedicine as really, when you think about Ontario health teams, and when we talk about integrated health and working with our partners in the community, it could be a community paramedic, it could be other health service provider like Lynn Home Care. If you look in Niagara, they're working with occupational therapists to go out and see people that are having falls. Social services, mental health care, hospitals of choice, could be referring them to a clinic, or it could be referring them to a nursing, those type of things, telehealth. So that's kind of the vision of the future state, that, you know, if we look at integrating paramedics into the broader system and strengthening and modernizing our system.
Okay, thanks, Kevin. Any questions with regards to that presentation? Sorry, Councillor Mackey.
Thanks, Kevin. Could you just update us on the non-emergency transport, you know, what the responsibility of the county is and who's providing? I mean, I know there's Voyager services out there that are very expensive, but what falls into that category and who's responsible, I guess, is the question.
Kevin?
So for non-emergency transfers, if a call is taken at our dispatch center, the dispatch center is obligated to take the call. We are obligated to receive it and service the call as soon as possible. Based upon emergency calls and coverage, the ability for us to do transfers is significantly reduced because we are generally responding to emergencies and covering off areas that are where there's gaps because we're responding to an emergency in another community. So if you look at, we used to do 45 to 50% of our calls were non-emergency transfers. This year we're down to probably 2 or 3%. Most of the stuff and our emergency calls have surpassed where we were when we were doing non-emergency transfers. So our ability to service them we have less ability. The Voyager has come into this area and picked up that. It was a slow, we worked with our community partners from hospitals and long-term care when we actually started to migrate out of the business. Not that we'll ever be totally out of it, but the private industry has picked that up. But they do have trouble meeting those demands. And we see it, typically what happens is if they don't meet the demand about getting somebody moved, generally what happens is the call gets upgraded, which it probably shouldn't, but that does happen if they can't move them quickly enough in a non-emergent setting. So then they end up using an ambulance. So we do see some pressures that way.
Councillor Mackey. Councillor Mullen, you had a question? No. Councillor Sampson.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Warden. Follow up to that answer. So the cost for the non-emergency transfer, is that then within your budget, or does that fall within the hospital budget or the Lynn budget? Who pays for that cost when it flips over to, let's say, the private operator?
Kevin?
It comes out of the hospital budget. So the hospitals will pay for those transfers. Like if we complete the transfer, there is no cost. Like there's a cost for us for resources using those. But if the hospital has to use that, then they pay 100% of that.
Okay, any other questions? Oh, Councillor Hicks, Deputy Warden.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I know in the county's response to the, I guess, the outreach with respect to modernization, one of the answers that you give is you should implement the recommendations of the auditor's report of 2013. That's 7 years ago. So I'm assuming that the auditor's report has some things that the county is saying haven't been done. And I noticed that throughout all of the dialogue, they keep talking about new models of care. The auditor in 2013 was talking about implementing new models of care. So what are those new models of care, or are we talking about new models of care?
Kevin?
Well, I would say that the new models of care we have more experience with what care we're delivering now in the community. So if you look at what we're doing with our community paramedic program, where we're seeing people before the emergency happens, primarily focusing on CHF, like congestive heart failure, diabetes, and chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. Those are type of treatment algorithms or expanded scope of care that we're looking at. And I would say back then, in 2013, those models were just evolving. But I think that part of the discussion at that time were the models where you could actually take them to another destination other than a hospital. So as far as a mental health facility, or you could take them to addictions facility, where there's specialties, or refer them in the community. As it stands, before the Ambulance Act changed, and it did change 2 years ago, we were obligated by law to take people to the hospital. There was no other destination that we could take people. And we've been building on that. The Regulation 257 has changed now, and they are working on these new models, and really around what they're focusing on right now are really alternate destinations, and treat and release, and treat and refer. Those are kind of things that they're working on right now.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions then? Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. The changes that are being recommended always come with a price tag. Is there any discussion around funding these modernizations? Will it be solely from the county funding itself, or will the province come forward with funding envelopes for this?
Kevin?
There's no commitment on funding as far as like the modernization, but if you see some of the suggestions, to maintain 100% funding of community paramedic, we're benefited that is 100% funded by the province. They talk about health equity, like in rural areas especially. The Auditor General talked about 15 minutes 90% of the time, and I believe it's only 60% of the services are meeting that. The needs in rural Ontario are different than the urban, and to figure out some sort of something different than the 50-50 cost sharing model in these other areas, that maybe there's a different proportion for that. And then the non-emergency is to fund those 100%, whether it's the service doing those somehow built into ours, or if it's the private operators doing that, but to ensure that system is strengthened. And so that would be something that would be the position is that should be 100% funded, because our mandate is to look after emergency calls. And then included in our report is, again, back to if there's modernization changes, is to be able to fund where somebody can do some proper planning and implementation, working with our community resources. But there's been no commitment for additional funds to do that.
Okay, thanks for that question. Any other questions to Kevin? Seeing none, all in favor of the report or the presentation? That's carried. Thanks, Kevin. Moving on, we have a report here from Grey County and Owen Sound Housing. Lacey, you're going to be doing the presentation. Come on up. I need a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Body, Councillor Gamble. Welcome. Floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'm here today on behalf of Grey County Housing Department to seek your approval for purchasing a parcel of vacant land west of its Twin Pines building located at 315 Bruce Street in Durham. The acquisition of this parcel will ensure legal access to and from Grey Road 4 for the Twin Pines building, which is owned by the Grey County and Owen Sound Housing Corporation, which is our housing corporation. The timing of this acquisition is as a result of discovering historical land ownership errors that occurred in this area. So just to give you a brief background on the property, I'm going to tell you a bit of what's happened over the last few years. In 2017, the county discovered that the property to the north of the Twin Pines building, which is shown in yellow on the screen, was not owned by the county. This property was thought to have been downloaded to the county on devolution from the province in 2001, and the county did pay taxes and maintain the property since that time. In 2018, the county was able to acquire the property north of Twin Pines through the Forfeited Corporate Property Act, and subsequently transferred these lands to 1993934 Ontario Inc., which I'll just refer to as the numbered company from now on. And that was for development of affordable housing. While the county was cleaning up title to the property shown in yellow, we also discovered that the sliver of vacant land to the west of the Twin Pines property, which is shown in green, both the transparent and the solid green on the map, was in the name of a previous owner who had since deceased. We tried to locate a descendant of that previous owner, but we were unable to locate an estate trustee. The sliver of lands also runs along the west side of the lands that are now owned by the numbered company. And when the numbered company acquired the lands to the north of Twin Pines, they retained a lawyer to locate the descendants of the previous owner of the land in green. With a great deal of research and delving through several generations of the family tree, the lawyers were able to locate descendants of the owner and obtain the necessary consents to pursue a court application appointing an estate trustee. The sliver of land was acquired by the numbered company in May of 2019. We've reached out to the numbered company, who we do have a working relationship with, and they are open to allowing the county to complete a survey of the sliver marked in green to split the parcels into 2 parts, but that would be at the expense of the county. The numbered company has requested compensation in the amount of $9,177.23, representing half of the legal expenses that they incurred in order to get an estate trustee to have the land transferred to them. The county will also be covering all legal costs for the transfer of these lands. The total estimated cost to acquire this parcel is $14,632.23, which includes compensation for the land, the survey costs, and the legal costs to complete the transfer. Not acquiring this parcel could result in potential access issues for the Twin Pines property. The county may in the future look at transferring the property from the county to the Housing Corporation, which would allow the 2 parcels in red and the solid green to merge. And the legal costs outlined in the report should be sufficient to cover that cost to transfer the lands down the road. We are recommending that the county enter into an agreement with the landowner, being the numbered company, to acquire the land, and that staff be directed to proceed with the acquisition prior to county council approval to expedite the process.
Thanks, Lacey. Any questions to that? Councillor Hicks.
So just one point of clarification, the sliver, the green sliver, is the proposal that the entire green sliver will form part of 096, or is a proposal that part of the green sliver will form part of 94 and the other part will form part of 96?
Lacey?
So the solid green sliver would form part of 0096, which is the red part, and the more transparent green sliver would stay with the numbered company and be consolidated with their parcel 0094.
Okay. Any other questions to that then? Okay, seeing none. All in favor? That is carried. Thank you. Good job. All right, moving on now with regards to the report from the CAO with regards to the task force review and direction. Madam CAO, welcome. Oh yes, we need a mover and a seconder, please. Is there a mover and a seconder? Put that on the floor. Councillor Millen, Councillor Hutchison. Go ahead, Kim.
Good afternoon, Council. The report before you is as a result of a request that came forward on December 12th from Council that we bring back a report on the status of the Blue Mountain Task Force. As you can see in the report, we've kind of outlined the work that's taken place with the task force over the last several years, and then make a recommendation. And I want to start off by saying that I do this in my role as the CAO to provide you with advice and guidance as I understand it. But certainly, this is for your consideration and deliberation. I just want to know that we've thought a lot about this over the last number of years, and I certainly don't want anyone to take offense about that, which I kind of fear from some of the social media that I've seen, that there is that possibility, and I really hope that we don't take it in that spirit. As outlined in the report, the task force was struck in 2017. At the time, Mayor John McQueen asked that the county have discussions about concerns raised by some of their residents of the town of the Blue Mountains about the equitability of the county levy. And the task force being struck was the process that council agreed was the appropriate one to facilitate those discussions. Since that time, there have been many hours spent by council and by county staff, as well as staff of the town of the Blue Mountains, to try and assess the situation and to inform. It saddens me to say that, in my estimation, despite all those many hours, we really haven't changed the conversation in that time. There is still an ongoing discussion about whether or not the levy that is paid by the residents of the town of the Blue Mountains is fair, and we just simply have not seemed to have been able to make progress in that regard. The report outlines all of the various discussions that and topics that took place over the years. What I didn't specifically put in here was some of the information from the very beginning. At the very outset of this, we retained MTE, our tax consultants, to provide information to us, as well as having discussions previous to that with Watson and Associates. The original report about the apportionment of the county levy, which is how this started, included some text that basically said, in all, Section 311 is quite explicit in setting out how the general upper tier levy is to be raised. The rules and restrictions that are contained in this section of the Municipal Act leave no other option than to allocate the county levy on the basis of assessment distribution. Tara, will you pull up that one thing? Thanks. This, if you can see that, okay. One of the principles that we seem to have struggled with here is the principle of fairness. And I just wanted to remind council that, like all municipalities, Grey County sets a levy that has to be, what's the right word? Everybody is treated exactly the same way. There's one levy for the whole county. And what you're seeing here on those tax rates is the all-in number. So that's the local, the county, as well as the education portion of the taxes. And the column to your right-hand side is the amount of taxes that would be payable by a resident of that municipality based on having a $500,000 assessment. So I've sorted them there, and then also put Toronto in just by frame of reference, since that might be something that, some of the folks would be more familiar with. If you scroll down, there's 2019 is there as well for you to see, and you can see where the differences are. So we prepared, and this was attached to the document, and we've updated this a couple of times along the way, a summary of the services and the spending that's happened in town of the Blue Mountains. Most recently, there have been a number of conversations about development charges and infrastructure spending. If you had an opportunity to take a look at capital construction projects, which are about on the third page of this, since 2013, between 2013 and 2017, county spent over $11 million on roads in town of the Blue Mountains. And there are 79 kilometers of county roads in the Blue Mountains out of the more than 800 that we have. Moving on from there, our capital plan between now and 2028 provides in excess of $30 million of spending for roads and paving in the town of the Blue Mountains. We have looked everywhere that we can to ensure as staff that the service that we are providing is up to the standard that everyone in the county expects. We deliver those services consistently. We've tried our best to ensure that we haven't left anyone out or we haven't inadvertently missed a service or a service level. I have not been able to determine that. So given all of those facts, the basis of my recommendation was that we have tried now for more than 3 years to come to a different understanding, and the process that we've been using simply hasn't been able to be successful in doing that. I suggest, and my recommendation was that going forward where there are concerns about or questions about service levels or infrastructure requirements or anything else, that those be brought to the county table so that you all have the opportunity to understand them and to discuss them and to provide direction to staff. There are people around the county who pay significant taxes in many municipalities. Part of having a democracy means that everybody gets treated fairly, everybody uses the same process. And I am always a little bit nervous where the tone of the conversation becomes one that is more adversarial than supportive. I don't believe this is healthy or helpful for our democracy going forward. We need to find a place and a set of goals and principles that we all agree on and that we can move forward together.
Okay, thanks, Kim. And just for clarity, and I guess through the before I go to questions, it was suggested it would go through the committee of the whole moving forward, whether any given municipality or whatever. And procedurally, is that just they contact the clerk, they wish to add item, or how does that process work?
I think there are a number of doorways that people can use to get items onto the council agenda. The notice of motion is one. There's the speaking to staff and raising an issue, a concern, a question, and with bringing that to our attention where we feel that we can't simply address that question or concern, but we're looking for further guidance from council, then we would prepare a report and bring that forward for the council's consideration.
Okay, thanks. I think that report would be good because to bring a notice of motion sometimes it's pretty top heavy. If you talk to staff and you need that in-between spot, so long as we could develop a process where any municipality was able to bring an item other than talking to the staff, if it can't get that way, so that'd be good. Okay, questions? Who's got a question? Who would like to make any comments? You guys must really want to get to lunch. Councillor Sampson.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. Thank you very much, Mr. Warden. I wasn't here when this task force was created. Some of the members here were. So I went back and I looked at the original documents, actually reviewed the tape that is now on YouTube of the meeting that was held where this item was discussed. If we go back a little bit earlier in history, it was a letter from the mayor of Blue Mountains requesting effectively mediation around their perception of inequality and unfairness as it relates to the tax levy and where that money was going and being spent. This council rejected that letter and that motion, and I guess as a solution, created the task force, which, if I'm reading, and I am reading from the staff memo at the time, was supposed to be a meeting with a combination of group discussions, presentations by members of staff as required. That's actually not, since I've been sitting on the committee, the way it's been structured and going. It's been operating as a subcommittee of council, which I think has handcuffed some of the discussions, or handcuffed the members to have the discussions that this very recommendation from staff back 2 years ago suggested. If you measure the success of the committee by its results, I would agree with you. It's an abysmal failure. We've achieved, in my view, absolutely nothing. And so my comment I made earlier that I think something is broken, I would argue it is, and it needs to be fixed. I don't know that abolishing the committee is the fix. It may be going back to what was originally suggested back in 2017, is that we have a true task force as opposed to a committee of council, and therefore gives a little bit more flexibility to have those frank and open discussions. The issue hasn't really changed. In fact, I would argue it's gotten worse since 2017 or before. This site has been around for years. My colleague to the left of me has indicated that this has been in the media attention, and he actually reported on it when he was a reporter years ago. But it's getting worse. And the crux of the matter is that while your numbers, and I don't have ours to reflect that, but I'll take it that the numbers you had on the screen for total tax bill is taken from some report that's valid data. It's the issue of the relative share of that tax bill between county and the town. And what's been happening is the county is occupying more of that tax base and leaving less, if you will, because there's only so much you can raise taxes globally, for the town to have. And so as it relates to town infrastructure that we are expected to fund from the local level, we are getting less and less and less and less. Our choice is to either increase the tax rate higher totally, so to go from your number of $4.99 to, let's say, Grey Highlands $54.42, but at that time that puts further pressure on our taxpayers, who are generally retired seniors on fixed income. Yeah, they have very expensive houses, but their ability to pay is given by as a function of their income. And generally, seniors, although we are getting more families going into the area, which is good news, but then the bad news to that is that they're looking for rec facilities. They're looking for hockey arenas. We don't have that ability to fund that because more and more of that tax dollar is going towards the county side. You watch the curve, it's going up. It's not going flat, it's not going down. 26% of the tax of the revenue of this county is funded by the town of Blue Mountains. As I said earlier, our rates are almost the same. So effectively, 40% to 30% of the total tax bill will go to the county and the town. That is going up over a period of time, giving less room for us to spend. So I'm trying to argue, through you, Mr. Warden, that there still needs to be a mechanism, a forum in which to have this discussion. I'll concede that the current forum isn't working, as demonstrated by the results. And I will concede with you that the results have been zero. And that, to me, is a demonstration of the process is broken. But total elimination of the discussion table, putting it back into a CAL format, where my councillor and I are supposed to wear the county hat and not the town hat, I think is not an efficient way to air out the issues that still need to be aired out and aren't resolved. Maybe we do need to go back to the original suggestion of the mayor of the town of Blue Mountains back in 2017, that we do subject the process to a provincial arbitration of some sort. At that time, it was the land, I can't remember the name of the committee. The Office of the Provincial Land and Development Facilitation. So if you read their mandate, you can actually drive a truck through it. It's fairly broad and wide open. It was originally intended to deal with disputes around large developments, but its mandate has expanded. So maybe that's the route to go. I don't know, but there needs to be something, because, as I said to you in my earlier delivery, and I'll finish up, Mr. Warden, for the first time ever in your budget presentation, you had a ratepayers group from the town of Blue Mountains here. I'm willing to bet that's not the last time they'll be here. There is an issue that they feel needs to be dealt with. They're asking it to be dealt with. They are your ratepayers, they are our ratepayers, and their issues should be attended to.
Just so your question of all that conversation you just had, which was good, is there another format of doing this? That's your question? Okay. Madam CEO.
Try this. I think our fundamental issue is one of understanding a clear problem statement. It won't matter what process we use if it's not agreed around the table what the problem is that we're trying to solve. The point that I continue to make is that every single taxpayer in Grey County is treated exactly the same by Grey County. There is no preferential treatment or unfairness in all of that. We only have the rules of the Assessment Act that govern how it is that taxes are levied. If the town of the Blue Mountains feels that they are somehow deficient in a service that's harming their population or preventing economic development, I think it's entirely appropriate for that to come back to this council so that it can be understood and it can be addressed. But to say that you're in a very unique situation in this county, that I don't think that, and maybe there's a lot more that we can do to help people feel more a part of Grey County and a part of this whole system. But what I observe is a group of people who don't feel that they're part of Grey County. They don't feel that the investments that it takes to run 4,500 square kilometers of Grey County are necessary or appropriate. I don't know what to say. We see this, another point I wanted to make for this council is we are not the only people dealing with these problems. Simcoe County has conversations with Bradford. Huron County has conversations with Bayfield. Peterborough County has problems with cottage owners and waterfront folks. Like, if there's an issue with our Assessment Act and the way that taxes are levied, then I think that's a conversation that we need to be having with the province.
Okay, thank you, Madam CEO. Do you wish to follow up on that, Councillor Sampson? Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Warden. I agree, and I appreciate the instruction on the Municipal Act and the Assessment Act. That's been very helpful. And I agree with you, that's the problem. So that's maybe why an approach with the provincial facilitator might make sense, because therein lies part of the problem around how the Assessment Act is crafted and how the Municipal Act is crafted. And you're right, Mr. Warden, we are not the only county with this issue. At Roma, I had a discussion with the mayor of Muskoka Lakes. Same problem in spades. Like, it makes ours look like a children's breakfast. Their problem is much larger and frankly worse. And there are other municipalities who are facing the same thing, upper tier and lower tier. So I think we need to have the forum. I don't know what it is, but to suggest that the forum is the committee of the whole, I think is problematic. Having said that, the previous member who sat in this chair and is ill and watching today brought forward through Rob the motion around the supplementary assessment provision. And we certainly appreciate that, because that allows us to do what we're asking. Can we have a little bit more of the tax revenue stay within Blue Mountains so that we can deal with the critical infrastructure that is basically needed to fuel the growth that fuels the levy increase that we all benefit from in this room. take a look at where your levy increase and your assessment increase came that funded, I think my number was 60% of the levy increase needs of this county in this budget. It came from Blue Mountain.
Thanks, Councillor Sampson. Any other comments or questions? I will say, I'm just trying to look at the date, Madam CEO. We do have a meeting set up to talk about regional transportation in that area, and I just don't have the date at hand. Do you remember that date? It was in Clarksburg. March 13th, okay, thank you. So that is something else that we've tried to organize, and I know you and I worked at that at the Western Wardens Caucus along with the representatives from Blue Mountain. Councillor Sampson, one more time, and then.
One more time, would it be appropriate to have an amendment to this motion that put this back to the task force, which we're meeting this afternoon, and have the task force recommend to this committee and this council a better method to deal with the issue? And if the answer is we can't figure that out, then that's the answer. I know we have a meeting scheduled for this afternoon. I can't remember when the next scheduled meeting after that is, but I think we're trying to meet monthly. But somehow between now and the next, let's say, committee of the whole cycle of this council, whether it's in the format or comes from that meeting that we're having tomorrow, or what's the word phraseology here? Group discussions and presentations by members, that we can come up with a better process that will help us deal with this issue. And it may well be that other members of this council and this county could also utilize the same process for their particular issues. And I've heard many. So maybe that's a solution. If I could move the amendment that this particular motion be referred back to the task force for consideration of an alternate task force structure and to report back to council.
Task force or process?
Yeah.
Madam, well, that's being drafted. Process, I need, if you're moving that, I need a seconder, and then we'll have the discussion on the amendment to the motion. Do I have a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Keaveney. I think, Madam CEO, you wish to speak to it? Go ahead.
This council has the responsibility to make decisions for the good of all of Grey County. That's your role and your mandate. I could not, in good conscience, recommend to you something that I think undermines your decision-making and your need to be responsible and informed about all of the things that influence the services that we provide. I don't like to say this, but it really does concern me that there's some flavor of pay to play here, because that's not how democracy works. Everybody gets a vote. Every property owner has a place at the table, whether you have a little bit or a lot. And we're here, all of us together, to make decisions about what's best for all of Grey County. I'll just leave it like that. I just don't know that we can solve the issue that's here with the way that it's being.
Thank you, Madam CEO. And just for clarity before we move to other questions, generally if it's deferred, you have a set of time, but if it's being referred, do you need a time frame in that? You don't? Okay. Councillor Desai.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I'd raised this point earlier as well around infrastructure in Grey County. And while I do take Councillor Sampson's point that the town of Blue Mountains is driving a lot of the assessment growth, at the same time, earlier today I mentioned that Grey Highlands could make a case for increased investment in roads because we are the gateway to the town of Blue Mountains. This is speculation, of course, but if all the county roads in Grey Highlands were to turn to gravel, maybe town of Blue Mountains wouldn't be as big a draw anymore because you'd have to go around a fair distance, and that would add a lot to your time. So while we do sit here as county councillors and we are to make recommendations and decisions in the best interests of the county, at the same time, there is nothing stopping us from bringing forward an issue that we notice at our municipal level. To point to an example, Councillor Milne, much to my chagrin, I'm having to use him as a positive example, but a few meetings ago, there was a bylaw that was being amended with regards to posted speed limits. Councillor Milne brought up that the speed limits in Dundalk should have been reduced to, I believe the number was 40 kilometers an hour, and this council approved that amendment by a split vote, I think it was. But the point being, Mr. Warden, that yes, we are here as Grey County councillors. Nonetheless, we also do remember that we are from the town of Blue Mountains, we are from Grey Highlands, Hanover, and so on. We do represent the member municipalities. So my question, I guess, is, and this is again, maybe I'm interpreting this wrong, so my question to Councillor Sampson is that he said that this could be an avenue for other municipalities. So does he mean that Grey Highlands, Hanover, Owen Sound, Chatsworth, Southgate could each have their individual task force? And then from that, agricultural communities would have a separate task force because agricultural communities have unique challenges too.
Okay, thank you for those comments. I want to bring this back because right now the discussion is to defer this, to have the opportunity for the community who's planned to meet this afternoon to have further conversation. So I want to put that back. It's about referring it to that task force to bring back, not necessarily the big discussion at this point. So I just want to get that back in. Councillor Woodbury.
As far as referring it back to the task force, we've heard today that the task force didn't get anywhere. We've heard that didn't exactly stick to what their reference was supposed to be. Why would we turn it back to that task force? To me, it's a decision of the county. I think at this table, we've got a lot of people that weren't here when the task force was set. Task force have a limited time. I think it would be great education, have things brought to the committee of the whole so all of us understand. If we need to set another task force for certain issues, whether it's town of Blue Mountains or anywhere else, that's our prerogative. And I think we would be better served as a county council as a whole, as well as the individual municipalities, to take them issue at a time, have a task force, have a set time, lead it to go somewhere. If this is to be referred to the provincial government because they have we have problems with their legislation, let's not do it as a task force. Let's us understand here at this table and have it come as a motion from this table. That's how I feel about the task force.
Okay, thank you for that, Councillor Woodbury. Councillor Potter.
Just briefly in answer to that, I think the request is that we try to get it right, because this task force has not worked. But as Councillor Sampson pointed out, it hasn't been following the mandate it was given. It's been operating somehow, but not following the mandate that was originally given. Second point I'd like to make is that, yes, we are in a democracy, and a sizable portion of that democracy is not very happy. And we are being asked to do something about it. So we are looking to try this process again, because we have to do something to bring a positive outcome to this. Right now, it isn't working. And if we can try the task force process again, but get it right this time, maybe we will solve the issue, and maybe we will set the course for future situations with other municipalities in Grey.
Do you wish to speak or do what other questions? Okay. Floor is yours when you get to the mic.
again, he asked specifically that make reference to this morning, but Michael Martin provided these comments. After reading your report on terminating the task force committee, I agree as its former vice chair when myself and Warden Mr. Barfoot were vice chair and chair respectively. The committee was set up to address concerns relating to the disparity of Blue Mountain's share of county budget. I believe that this is a continuing debate, not amenable to settlement, unless government changes legislation to allow Blue Mountains to become a single-tier municipality. Please provide these comments to your committee of the whole tomorrow. The task force committee was never intended to carry on after the last election cycle.
Okay, thank you for that information. Councillor Mackey?
Sorry, who was that from?
Michael Martin.
I think you indicated that was a previous task force member, right? Right, from the Blue Mountains.
Thank you, Mr. Warden. I want to pick up on the comments of Mr. Martin that were just read. I do not share the opinion that the task force was an abysmal failure. In fact, quite the opposite. I would say that what we achieved with the task force, and I was on it in the previous council and in this mandate as well, what we achieved was a greater understanding, I think, of the issues at play. There was a lot of listening. There was a lot of taking note. And what came out of that listening and taking note, I think the greatest achievement was the fact that we created this document, which we all have access to as a link, the Grey County Services outline. So department by department, we have set out, here's what the county does, and here's what the town of Blue Mountains receive, department by department, from the county. So you can go through that document and it shows you transportation, housing, social services, on and on. So once we achieved that, and correct me if I'm wrong, but at the end of the last term of council, we had that document, and folks like Michael Martin, and there was a general consensus around the table, my recollection, was that this is very useful. The problem is really a problem of communication. We need to do a better job of communicating to those people from the town of the Blue Mountains exactly what you are receiving from the county, which if you look at this document, it's significant. So it's not a matter of an unfairness. I think what we achieved was documenting, having staff go back and pull out service by service, what is the town of Blue Mountains receiving? I invite everyone around this table, that document is still here. At the end of the last term, we agreed as a task force, the Town of Blue Mountains Task Force, we agreed that this is a very useful document, and the next step ought to be perhaps doing a better job of communicating to residents of the Town of Blue Mountains exactly what we're receiving. That's the issue at play. That said, I don't think that the task force has been an abysmal failure. I think we achieved something significant. Do I think it should continue? Absolutely not. Because I don't see us going any further than what we achieved, which is a very good document that shows what the town of Blue Mountains receives. For that reason, I will not be supporting, I will be supporting the motion to discontinue the task force. If the issue is something else, and I don't think that any kind of task force is going to take us any further, I really do not. So if we need to go further by some other form, I'd love to hear what that is, but perhaps that should come to County Council, and we can make a decision at that time whether or not we're going to look at something else. I don't think putting it back to the task force, Mr. Warden, is going to change anything. I don't think continuing the task force is going to change anything, but I absolutely disagree that we didn't, with the comment that we didn't achieve anything by having this task force.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Hicks. Deputy Warden, any further comments, conversation? So this is about the question about referring it back to the task force that is scheduled this afternoon at 2 o'clock or thereabouts, right? And so no other discussion. So I'll put the motion on the floor. All in favor of referring it, sorry. Okay, that's in favor. Opposed? That motion is lost. So going back to the original motion then, which is still moved in second, which hasn't changed. Discussion on the original motion. And that's with the recommendations that's coming out of the report. And just for clarity, before we have that vote, in the sense of the new process, as far as coming back to the committee of the whole, there'd be something that will come back in that sense, is that right? And between staff and notice of motion, there may be some working of how that process may work. Madam CEO?
Certainly, if council would find that beneficial, certainly we can reiterate that, but it's the same process that would be in place for any of you who wanted to bring an item forward.
I was just thinking that if we review that, maybe if there's a burning issue, instead of a notice of motion, there's a in-between spot that could work, but I'll leave that with staff. Okay. Discussion, total discussion. All in favor of the motion on the floor? And in voting in favor is voting the recommendations. Opposed? That motion is carried. Okay. Do we wish to break for lunch? Yep. Okay. All right, we'll take a recess now and come back as soon as everybody's had their nourishment.